there is nothing like it on the planet that can explain that feeling, especially if you've worked for months for this, trained for years for this, fundraised for years, maybe dreamt of it, to finally be there in that place. Like, I mean, it's magic. I can't wait to do it again. Hello and welcome to the Duffel Shuffle. I'm Adrian Ballinger, and we're here to discuss the world of climbing and skiing in all its forms through the eyes of mountain guides.
And I'm Sam Kiekefer. In each episode, we'll unpack exhilarating stories, share invaluable insights, and get up close and personal with some of the most experienced and passionate guides and athletes in the industry.
Whether you're a seasoned alpinist or a weekend warrior, the Duffel Shuffle is your ticket to the thrilling world of climbing, skiing, and mountaineering. Join us.
Welcome back. This is episode 29 of the Duffel Shuffle podcast. We've got a really awesome episode coming up. We collected about 35 questions from our guests, mostly about Everest, but about mountaineering and climbing and 8,000 meter peaks as well. And we ran through them, and it was Ask Adrian Hardball questions as quickly and as efficiently as we could as he's sitting in Everest Base Camp. So awesome episode coming up. If you submitted questions, hopefully we got to yours. And if you have further questions, write them in the comments, send them through our Instagram, and we'll do another episode like this in the future because it was certainly a fun one. But without further ado, Adrian, you're not in Everest Base Camp anymore. What the heck is going on? Did you guys already summit?
This doesn't look like my yellow tent. No, I'm not in Everest Base Camp, but we also have not summited. We've actually dropped back for a recovery period after our acclimatization rotations and before the weather window and Alpenglow summit push. Wild thing about dropping back for the first time ever, we dropped back instead of just a base camp at 17,000 feet. We took a van ride another 45 minutes or an hour below base camp to a new town called Tashizon that's been built on the north side at 14,000 feet and are in this incredible, beautiful, modern hotel with great showers and heated floors and amazing food. And it is different. Like, let's start there. It is definitely different to do this. And leaving the mountain, this is the first year we're trying it with Alpenglow. So TBD whether it feels like a good thing. There is no doubt in my mind that coming 3,000 feet lower and staying in a heated hotel, people's bodies recover. We've worked really, really hard over the past 10 days with people sleeping at 23,000 feet without supplemental oxygen, dealing with a bunch of wind and challenging conditions, carrying big loads. Like, people are wrecked. And so recovery has always been super important. And we've invested hundreds of thousands of dollars in having this beautiful base camp to allow for recovery. And now this is an experiment to come down even lower. I can tell you my team members are really, really stoked about it. Like, you think you feel good and then you drop down and all of a sudden you realize you were sleeping like shit and you weren't putting that many calories in because it was difficult to eat and digest food. And you were like a little bit on edge and grumpy with each other. So like last night was like this magical night of like eating way too much food, having the first beers anyone's had in weeks, and like staying up late and telling stories, whereas before everyone's going to bed at 8 p.m., and it was like, oh, this is different. So I feel a little disconnected from the mountain, which is a little bit strange, but I mean, we're literally spending 24 hours down here and I think it's going to pay off.
So was this a planned part of the itinerary for this season, or was this more of a spontaneous decision to come down and spend this really tough night in the hotel?
This was totally spontaneous. So in the past, like, I have dropped back in my personal no oxygen climbing before, like Corey and I, when we did seasons over here in 2016 and 2017. When you acclimatize for no oxygen, you climb all the way to 8,000 meters or, 26,000 feet, and you are completely destroyed. And so in those seasons, we used to drop back to our hotel, but it was like a 4-hour drive. And the hotel was kind of an abomination. Like, you didn't really want to go into the bathroom and stuff like that. So we needed to come down to these lower altitudes, but like, it was not a good scene. And it's not uncommon at all on the Nepal side. People take helicopters down to tea houses down at these kind of altitudes, like 14,000 feet. So it's certainly like an established thing to do. But we never felt like it was worth the risk with our clients because of sickness in tea houses or in like bad hotels and things like that. The big thing that changed this year is as we were coming into Everest Base Camp, the CTMA, the Chinese Tibetan Mountaineering Association, who helps us with all our local logistics, was like, hey, there's this brand new hotel you should check out below base camp. And we're like, huh? And basically what's happening is China and Tibet are building this infrastructure for tourism to Everest Base Camp, and they don't want to build a bunch of infrastructure at Everest Base Camp at 17,000 feet, which I think is fantastic. They're kind of leaving that place alone. And so they've built this new town called Tashizan. It used to just be a few like farmers and herders here. And now I would say, I mean, there's like huge cranes like you see in like New York City or Doha building. I would say there's 24 new hotels being built here. And it is wild. The hotels are modern and beautiful and oxygenated. And this is all infrastructure being built for mostly Chinese tourists. And it's these new hotels less than an hour from base camp that made us feel like it was worth doing this. So it was totally an on the fly decision. We saw the hotel on the way in and we're like, that's amazing. And now here we are.
First, you cut the expedition to 35 days using pre-acclimatization. Now you build this really nice base camp with fancy espresso machines. And now you're dropping down to 14,500 feet and enjoying nice hotel life. It's really tough out there on the north side of Mount Everest.
Yeah. I mean, I actually feel very strongly about this because I've been trying to think about how to talk about this and how to show this. And even admittedly, like Alpenglow isn't doing a good job of this, or I'm not doing a good job of this. Like, first of all, no doubt this expedition is now easier today than it was when I started in the early 2000s. And it was easier in the early 2000s than when Messner and people were doing it in the 80s. And that was easier than when the first summits happened in the 50s. And that was easier than when it took 6 months for an expedition in the 20s when they were sailing from England and trekking across India and getting permission from the Tibetan kingdom. Yeah, I mean, yes, it's getting easier and easier, of course, hands down. And arguably so is most of life for at least the middle class in developed countries, right? We're making things more and more comfortable. Cars are easier, electric cars, heating, whatever, air conditioning. So we are part of that, yes. With that said, what I think we're all failing at is like how fucking hard and brutal and kind of gross like climbing Everest is. Like, I think we are the absolute best at what we do on guiding this. And every single one of our team members has had the shit completely kicked out of them. And like, what we don't show on Instagram is like waking up in the morning and vomiting and the headache and the like struggle of like fighting through the wind, and like just every step here is hard, and somehow it's just harder to capture that than it is the beautiful sunsets in the cappuccino machine, the espresso machine. Like, you know, we're here on the north side. I bet 30% of people on the north side have already gone home. Not from our team. We've lost one. 30% of climbers. Like, I'm just
you lost
watching
one to home.
We lost one to home. Yes, not to death, to home. Work emergency, right? No one talks about that. That's not sexy to talk about. Like, shit falls apart of your business and you have to go home after this dream you've worked for a year and a half for. But like, I'm walking by other companies like Ferdenbach and Climalaya and the Chinese team, and the teams are getting smaller and smaller and smaller, and no one's talking about that. But it's because it's so dang hard. And maybe that's enough said on that. Is like, yes, it's easier than it was. It is still so hard to succeed here.
No, I think you're right. And it's easy to make a little fun and poke at it because it's a change from what we've seen in the past. But honestly, like, I think that there's more argument to be made for coming down and resting and recovering at 14,500 feet than there is to have a super fancy espresso machine in base camp, because one is actually like giving you a better chance at success on the mountain, and the other is purely comfort. Although you might disagree with that exact statement, but you know, certainly like there is comfort associated with dropping down, but there's also a ton of like true recovery value that is hard to even quantify by doing so. And hopefully you set your team up for success on the mountain when you head back to base camp tomorrow or today in a few hours.
Yeah, in a couple hours today, we'll head back up. This is literally like a 24-hour rotation down here. I don't want people to lose sight of like what it feels like to sleep in a sleeping bag and like pee in a pee bottle, and like, you know, to feel that connection to the mountain, to be looking at it, to see avalanches, to hear the radio talking to the Sherpa. Like, we don't want to lose sight of that. This was literally like one night, pure bliss. Now we go to work.
Right on. Well, we're recording this episode or this news section on May 16th. It'll come out in 6 days or so. Interestingly, we're talking about, the movement on the south side of the mountain that's pretty active. And I'm sure some teams on the north side are heading up as well. But there's already a bit of chaos on Mount Everest. And there are hundreds, if not close to 1,000 climbers really like positioned to head to the summit as we speak. And, when this episode comes out, those climbers will have already either made it or turned around. What is kind of your take on what's going on Mount Everest right now?
I mean, I just love Mount Everest so much and believe so powerfully in the experience that I want to be positive. I want to encourage people to come here and do this if they've put the time and energy in, the years of work to get to that point. So whatever I say for the next 5 minutes, let's remember that I still believe in this experience. But like mostly right now, I'm just like bummed and angry about what's going on the mountain. The summit ropes got put in these windows, 10 days ago, 8 days ago, in these small but safe weather windows. And that kind of opened up the ability for people to start climbing to the summit. But the current weather windows are like really crappy. So essentially, the jet stream is still sitting right above Mount Everest. And there are the models that we all look at, the weather models show these little dips in wind that theoretically make for summit windows. But it is so clear to anyone who's worked on these mountains before that these are not good windows. And if you look at social media right now, you're seeing people climb in like huge winds. And basically, that impatience of teams, both sides, north side and south side. There's a north side operator going right now, trying to summit tomorrow, along with lots of south side operators. They're basically putting their Sherpa and clients in far more risk than is necessary. And don't take it from me, like literally the best forecaster on the mountain, a company called Meteotest that, probably 15 companies pay huge amounts of money for these forecasts. For the first time in 20 years, the owner of the company basically wrote like, what the fuck are you guys doing? I've been telling you over and over, like the jet stream is sitting here. Like, why are you going? And like, he never gives opinions like that. And I think, I don't want to speak for him, but I think perhaps there's a level of frustration of like this sport can be safer. This activity, like it can be much safer than you're making it. And maybe he doesn't understand the direction things are going. But again, I don't want to talk for him. So I should speak for me, like watching how many people right now. And again, like you said, 6 days from now, we'll see the outcome of it all. But people are going for windows that like could be completely fine for super strong professional climbers. This is what we talked to our group about because they're like, it's really hard to sit and wait when everybody seems to be going. And on Instagram, you're seeing successes. But the thing is, like the windows people are going for right now, as long as everything goes perfect, and as long as you are one of the stronger, fittest people on the mountain, you're going to be fine. It's totally a summit window for you. But the problem is that is not a window for the vast, vast majority of non-professional climbers who are currently on the mountain. And it is not a window for the Sherpa who are doing this work. And so, like, what we're seeing, I mean, we're 4 days into this weird summit window that's not a window. And like, I think on the south side, there's been 4 deaths, 3 from one company, Snowy Horizon. What the fuck? And then, like, we're hearing about dozens of cases of frostbite. And we're hearing about like these heroic, quote unquote, heroic, like long line rescues from friends of mine in like Maurizio Ferlini and Simone Moro. They're having the time of their lives trying to do these heroic rescues at like 23, 24,000 feet. But they're rescuing people with like altitude sickness. Like, why are those people there? Like, it just seems like conservative decision making has been completely thrown out of the window. And instead of talking about why those people are in that situation in the first place, we're talking about the heroic rescues and the amazing Himalayan Rescue Association that does all this medical care at base camp. And I'm glad those things are there, but why do we need them in the first place? If you look at the north side of the mountain, we have no helicopter rescue and no medical association. And yet I haven't seen a single case of frostbite yet, and I haven't seen any deaths from altitude sickness yet. I recognize we have fewer people on the mountain, but like it's all about guiding, decision making, expedition leadership to not put people in the situations where you need those things. Of course, I'm glad we have them. And in those extreme examples, like there should be heli rescues, right? There should be a couple of heli rescues a year when unexpectedly things go horribly wrong. But if you're having dozens of helicopter rescues, that's a choice.
Yeah, I mean, oh man, it's fascinating to watch. I mean, my first reaction is like, well, yeah, like what's this isn't new, right? Like this has been going on for years and it seems to be getting worse and worse and worse. But at the same time, like we as a society and as climbers and as the media have just kind of accepted that like people die on Mount Everest and it's okay. And that's wrong. Certainly that's wrong. But that's kind of where my head goes initially. It's interesting you talk about the weather forecasting, and I've been getting those emails, weather forecasting for Everest and Cho, twice a year now for the past, few years. And I woke up and I'll just read the subject line was some conceptual reasoning. Normally the subject line is Everest, Friday, May 16th. Right. And so, yeah, certainly like there was a lot of interesting, side things going on in that email and coming from, the weather forecaster basically giving like some opinion on how the mountain should be guided, which, you could say that he doesn't have the place to do that. But at the same time, like he's seen a lot of stuff and he's heard a lot of stuff. And this stuff shouldn't be going on Mount Everest. Now, why are people going for the summit in these short windows? I mean, I think it's important to recognize that the Everest summit windows are never guaranteed. And so I think when people have a significant investment and when they are eager for a goal, they often make decisions that are a little bit like skewed, and you see an opportunity and you want to take that opportunity because there's no guarantee that a better opportunity will come around. But I think that's where there's a lack of leadership and lack of guidance by these companies to say, oh, this might be right for one person, but it's not right for our team. And I question whether those companies even care about their clients making it to the summit or making it back alive. I think that they're there for the publicity and for the money. And that is kind of sad. And I don't know how to change that. But it's pretty wild to watch. And we're recording this 6 days before it's coming out or 5 days before it's coming out. And there's zero doubt in my mind that there will be many deaths on Mount Everest in the time between recording this and when it launches.
Yeah. I mean, 100%, Sam. As we were talking about it, like I in no way want to be callous about the deaths and loss of individuals and their families and friends. Like it is, of course, brutal. We've all lost so many people in the mountains. And so like, I do want to have compassion and empathy for the people that are lost. I also want to be very clear that not every death on Everest can or should be prevented. Risk is part of these sports and why we do them. But I've said it so many times on this podcast and other podcasts, like once money exchanges hands from an individual client who is a non-professional and they pass off the decision making to mountain guiding or expedition logistics company, then that responsibility and relationship totally changes. And like we need to hold these companies accountable for unnecessary deaths. There's no OSHA over here. There's there's nothing but the public forum to discuss these issues and challenges. And I don't think our sport, activity, whatever you want to call it, industry is going to change until the public forum pushes them. And it's easy to be an armchair mountaineer at home and talk about the deaths and we should close Everest and it's all bullshit. Like, that's not what I'm doing. This is my 14th year on the mountain. I make money here, but much more often I lose money here and like make decisions that are not necessarily best for my company in terms of profitability or size, but it's like, I hope it's best for this mountain and the future and longevity of this activity and what a beautiful thing it can be. And things just need to change. Like profit motive has absolutely skewed mountain guiding decision making in a way that I don't see happening anywhere else on the planet. And I think we need to keep talking about it. Obviously, this is not like, oh, Alpenglow is the only one doing it right. Like Like I am standing on the shoulders of my mentors, right? Like specifically to this weather window thing, like in that email you just mentioned, the forecaster mentioned Russell Bryce. Like Russell was famous back in the early 2000s when the craze was just starting. And like, he was the one willing to not, you know, buckle to the pressure of clients wanting to be the first or wanting to get done so they could go home and being willing to wait. Dave Hahn is an American who was really famous for this, that he always waited for a late May window. And it's not that there can't be good early windows. I would love to summit some seasons. I have summited some seasons May 10th to May 15th. And it's like, it's great to go home early. But some seasons, like this one, the early windows are not non-professional climber summit windows. They just aren't. And that doesn't mean companies aren't going to have lots of success over the next few days. But if you dig in, and I hope some of the journalists working on Everest this season dig in and find the frostbites and the rescues and the helicopter pickoffs, all these things that should not have happened.
And I would add to that and just say that it's so fun and easy to blame overcrowding. And certainly crowding can contribute to these incidents, but it is not the cause of these incidents. It is an additional factor. And, there's no crowding effect that has caused the existing fatalities and rescues. And there will be no crowding effect that causes many of the future deaths that we know will unfortunately happen this season on Everest.
Yeah, I mean, we'll say it over and over again. I don't think it's an overcrowding issue. It is an inexperience issue. And it's not just inexperience of clients. We need to stop blaming clients. It's either inexperience or lack of ethics of their mountain guides, sometimes their Sherpa, and absolutely their expedition leaders. If you look at the industry today, so many companies have popped up in the last few years, foreign and local, with people making false claims about their experience. And I think just being unethical in how they're leading people on the mountain. And we're seeing that play out right now.
So, Adrian, let me ask you a question. It's no secret that Alpenglow is one of, if not the most expensive operator on the mountain, and also regarded as one of the best operators on the mountain. And many of these operators that we're speaking about that need an ethics check are also the more affordable operators on the mountain and the most affordable operators on the mountain. Is there a way that you can have quality of guiding and experience on the mountain without some of the luxuries to bring the price to a more manageable level and allow clients who may have goals and passions to summit Mount Everest, but not the funds to afford a trip like Alpenglow's?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it's a hard question. I think, first of all, yes, like I think there's a big place in the industry for a company that offers logistics support to highly competent climbers. So if you've been climbing on your own for a decade around, big mountains, building experience, and you put together a team of 4 of your friends to go and do that, and you truly only need logistics support, well, the cost should be half the price of Alpenglow, because one of the biggest costs of Alpenglow is IFMGA certified mountain guides. And if you don't need an IFMGA certified mountain guide helping to make the really hard decisions on the mountain, then the cost should be half. But people at home need to ask themselves very, very carefully, can they make their own decisions in one of the most difficult mountain arenas on the planet? The decision making, I'm 30 years almost into my mountain guiding career, and I still find the mountain guiding decision making on Mount Everest to be incredibly complicated. And I lean on every day of that 30 years of experience to try to make the best decisions possible. And I still don't always get it right. So for people to go non-guided, logistics only, look very deeply in yourself whether you have that experience. Outside of that, I don't think Everest can become much cheaper, because Alpenglow, we say we're not in the luxury arms race. Like, we have a cappuccino machine and a nice tent and heaters, but like none of that is expensive. The money that you're paying for Mount Everest to Alpenglow is going to the experience level of our guides and Sherpa and cooks. So people stay healthy, strong, and have the best chance of success when they are non-professional mountaineers. And those people, those Sherpa, those guides, those cooks, they deserve the wages they're getting from us. And it makes our trips really expensive. It's not the cappuccino machine.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think that's important to acknowledge. It's an expensive trip to run. And, you didn't even mention the fact that the permit alone is $20,000 or something like
Yep.
that. So,
18,000 on the north side. Yeah. And
yeah, it's
the other way
upfront
to make
is,
trips affordable, the other way to make trips cheaper is to take loads of people. And that's what the big companies are doing to reduce rates is they're taking, there are companies with over 100 clients. There is no way you can safely run 100 clients on Mount Everest. Periods, hands down, no question. You cannot do it. You also cannot find 100 clients who are competent and experienced and ready for Mount Everest. They just aren't out there. And so, like, that's the other thing. The only way to, like, we have to keep our teams small in order to have highly experienced clients who have earned their right to be there. And in order to have a cohesiveness that when the shit hits the fan, the team works together. And that makes the trip more expensive, period.
all right, well, here's my plug. Interview your mountain guide or your expedition operator. And if you're curious, the difference between a Alpenglow trip and a trip that costs 70, 60, 50, whatever percent of Alpenglow trips, call Adrian and interview Adrian. Pretend that you're a client ready to sign up for Adrian's trip. And then interview your other operator that's half the cost and see how you feel after those two conversations. Because I do think you'll notice a difference.
Yeah.
Sorry, Adrian, you're going to have like 10 times as many phone calls this fall for Everest, but maybe you'll land one of them.
I'd much rather talk about Everest than look at spreadsheets or financial spreadsheets. So let's go.
Well, hopefully this small summit window that might even not be a summit window because only some of the models agree that the winds are calm enough, doesn't lead to a bunch of accidents on the mountain, but time will tell. And we will talk to you soon to gather more information and hear what you're hearing on the mountain.
That sounds great, Sam. Thanks so much. I hope Tahoe's good. I'm looking forward to flip-flops and board shorts soon.
No, it's been snowing a lot. Yeah, we've been skiing POW. No flip-flops here.
Well, that sounds good too.
Stay tuned for our Ask Me Anything episode. We've got 30 awesome questions about Everest with Adrian. Welcome back. This is episode 29 of the Duffel Shuffle podcast. Adrian, you're back in a yellow tent far, far across the middle of the world.
My favorite place on the planet. It's north side, Everest Base Camp, 17,200 feet. It's yellow in here.
Awesome. How do you feel?
I feel great. We've spent, I think, 3 nights here now. So between pre-acclimatization and then 3 nights at this altitude, like I just did my saturations before you hopped on. It's like, high 80s and eating well, drinking well, sleeping more or less. Actually, a funny thing is just been getting used to the cold again, actually. Like, I've been cold a lot all winter skiing, but haven't really been sleeping in the cold. I didn't do any snow camping or anything this winter. So there's a little bit of a acclimatization to just like being cold and cold being okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And like remembering things like when you have to pee a little bit, get out of your sleeping bag and pee versus, hold it because you're going to wait till it gets a little warmer outside or whatever. It's when you don't do it for a while, those little things really, really count.
Yeah, exactly right. But yeah, we're like beyond stoked. The north side of the mountain is empty once again this year. My team is super strong, both Sherpa and mountain guides, as well as our members. The weather's been stellar. The Chinese have just been super welcoming and things are so much smoother than last year, which was the first year of reopening since COVID. It's like everything that both we and they learned from last year is just like, it feels like we're firing on all cylinders this year. So stay tuned. Maybe the shoe's going to drop at some point, but right now we're just like having the smoothest season ever and loving it.
Well, you better knock on some wood real quick because you got a lot of days left on Mount Everest over there.
Yeah, exactly. We've been at base camp an entire 3 days.
Yeah, things are going great. What could go wrong?
We're basically doing lots of day hikes. One of the beauties of the north side, we can live at 17,000 feet where you can drive to, so you could be really comfortable. We can hike in our tennis shoes to over 21,000 feet in sneakers, like approach shoes. And so it's just our whole focus. We'll probably spend a full week here in base camp just doing hikes, getting acclimatized. and then doing a bunch of like rope skills, fixed rope techniques, just kind of redialing everyone's systems. Everyone has earned the right to be here. They've all done a bunch of work on fixed lines before. They've all been to at least 23,000 feet before. But like now we want to reinforce those skills and break any bad habits that have formed with other guides or guide companies and kind of get everyone marching in the same direction. That's what we do this week before we head up the mountain for a rotation.
Awesome. Well, we talk a ton about Mount Everest and 8,000 meter climbing on this podcast. It's definitely our most frequent topic. And Everest in particular is, the bulk of what we're talking about many, many times. I think, people still have questions. And that's one of the cool things about Mount Everest is it's this like pie in the sky, really unique, aspirational thing that, whether you have an interest in climbing it or not, there's curiosity in almost everyone when the topic of Mount Everest comes up. And so we've been getting tons of questions, over the past year plus of this podcast. And we decided to kind of collect them and do a little bit of a Ask Me Anything. A lot of it is around Mount Everest, but there's definitely some other questions in here, I believe. And we're going to just kind of run through them and hit them. If it's a good question, we might elaborate. If it's a bad question, it might get a short answer, but we're going to ask every question that was covered.
Wow. Epic. I don't know about every question, but let's see what we got. To be clear, I have not seen these questions, so we'll be doing this like off the cuff as we go. Let's do it.
I haven't seen him either, so we're in,
What a
same
great
playing field.
co-host and producer. Hasn't seen the questions. What are we doing here?
All right. Question number 1. So we're going to categorize these a little bit. We got question number 1 is around costs and financial support. So just starting off, how much does it cost to climb Mount Everest? And let's see the, rough ballpark range.
Yeah, so there is a really large range. I guess a good place to start is Alpenglow. So Alpenglow runs small, really high quality trips with a focus on the most experienced and rad high altitude Sherpa and mountain guides on the planet. And that is not cheap. So our group trip is $98,000, or to go on a one-on-one private with an IFMGA certified mountain guide, it's $165,000. We're obviously at the upper end of the market due to those focus on safety, ethics, and really incredible staff. Of course, we have the basic luxuries, like, there's a little bit of a luxury base camp arms race going on right now, and we don't really buy into it. We're not trying to have the raddest sauna or hot tub or espresso machine. But at the same time, we have a nice espresso machine. We have a really comfortable base camp tent. There are things we have, but whenever our rates go up, our costs go up, it's almost always because of wanting to have the best possible staff and make sure that they are paid really, really well for the dangerous and hard work they do. And that's both Nepalis and foreign mountain guides. So that's kind of top of the marketplace. Of course, you can find celebrity mountain guides for $300,000. There's this kind of sky is the
Are
limit.
Are we talking to a celebrity mountain guide for $300,000?
No, I'm a minor celebrity, small fish. And then at the very lower end of the marketplace is the local Nepali companies who I would argue, and actually some foreign companies as well. We shouldn't say only Nepali companies, but companies who are just cutting massive corners in terms of communications, oxygen, safety, and have generally really inexperienced staff that don't need to be paid nearly as much. And you can join a team for probably as low as $35,000. And, I think it's important to have that budget option. At the same time, I think they should have more regulations on them. That budget option is only available on the Nepal side, not on the Tibet side. There should still be common sense regulations around safety and like leave no trace, removing trash and things like that that are missing right now. And then I think there needs to be a lot more clarity in advertising. So someone joining a $35,000 trip should understand they don't have a mountain guide. They have a very weak safety net around them. So there is certainly a place for that, but it's probably more a place for, let's say, a climber who climbs almost full time, runs their own trips, doesn't go to Denali and Aconcagua and all these mountains guided, goes unguided, has built a huge wealth of like decision making experience in the mountains, and then wants to go on the cheapest possible trip with the least support allowed by the government and have a much higher likelihood of failure, but also more of an independent trip. That's why I think those budget operators should exist, but they should stop being allowed to claim that they offer the same level of safety and experience in decision making that a highly experienced team with IFMGA mountain guides does.
I'm sure you just answered like 6 of these questions in one response, but we'll keep going. So, whether we're
Fantastic.
talking about a $35,000 trip or a $165,000 trip, they're all expensive. That is, climbing Mount Everest is probably the most expensive or one of the most expensive peaks to climb. We're talking in the same ballpark as other 8,000-meter peaks and places like Vinson. What makes climbing a peak like Mount Everest so expensive, regardless of which camp you're in, the $35,000 or the $165,000?
Yeah, so that bottom, the very base fees that everyone has to pay are a permit to the government of whichever side of the mountain you're climbing, so Nepal or Tibet. And those permits, I think, on the south side are maybe $11,000 this year, going up to $15,000 next year. And on the north side, they're $18,000. And so right away, you have this base fee that goes to the government, period. And then you have to hire a logistics operator. It's not possible for an American, for example, to work with the Chinese government to put their own trip together. So you must join a professional, like a company that's been approved by the government. And that's where your next big chunk of fees is going to go to. And that's going to go to everything from having a base camp to a bathroom to hopefully some sort of communication system to food for a month and a half to transportation in and out from the base camp. And, 1,000 other small things start to add up. And that's where you get to that base number. Hopefully, I think both sides now require that you have a Sherpa, a Nepali or Tibetan high altitude worker with you. That's also a big part of the fee. Whether or not that person climbs with you, they have to at least be on the mountain.
So, between the permit and the logistics, we're already hitting $20,000, regardless of how budget of an operator you're with or which side of the mountain you're climbing on. It's just the permit and the logistics operator right there. You're checking into that $25,000 range right off the bat.
Yeah, as far as I know, there's no one below 35 anymore. There was a few years ago, some people were trying to offer trips from between 20 and 25, and like it was just so unethical that lower bar of the market could not survive. So now we're in that like 35-ish range is the cheapest you can get. And of course, somewhere in there is a profit margin, hopefully, for your logistics company, right? Like whether you're hiring a mountain guide company from the US or a local Nepali or Tibetan company, of course, there should be a margin built in there.
Absolutely. Do you know of any ways to get financial support? Or like what are the best ways to get financial support for your average climber on a place like Mount Everest?
Yeah, so it's obviously a huge amount of money, and it's something I fight with in my own brain a little bit. Like there are times that I wish someone with no financial ability, a 22-year-old kid on their first job out of college, could go and climb Mount Everest. But the reality is because of the dangers up here and the like opportunities for destroying this incredible place and very like tenuous place where human beings are not meant to live, I just can't find a way to make these trips cheap while also maintaining a high standard of ethics. So with that said, yeah, the next step is how can people fund these trips? One of the cool things is on my Alpenglow trips, of course, I regularly have people who have been very successful in life and have a lot of financial ability. But I every single year have at least a couple of people on the trips who have what I would call completely normal jobs, or even less than normal jobs, work for the post office, crab fishermen in Alaska, dirtbag from Jackson Hole. And those people have saved for years to be able to do this trip. And so that's step one, I think. If you decide you want to climb Mount Everest, make a 10-year plan, right? And you're going to slowly build up those funds, a couple of grand a year, while also building the skills and making sure that you really want to put this much money into this trip. Because by the time you finally get there, you're hopefully going to have climbed dozens of other mountains and found out whether it's really meaningful enough for you. Because there are so many very inexpensive mountains in the world. Save Everest until you're sure it's worth that years and years of saving that you've had to do. And then some of my climbers and lots of climbers on the mountains find ways to get partial support. The wild thing about Everest is it is still this like cultural icon. I don't know if that's the right word. Like there's only been 9,000 ascents ever. And, by like 5,000 people, because there's so many Sherpa and people like mountain guides who have done multiple ascents. So it is still a remarkably unusual and wild thing for a human being to do. And that means that it is often possible to raise money to fund your trip if you have a cool story, if you're good at storytelling, if you like to do social media. Or so many of my clients have like a company they work for who are like, will you bring a flag to the top? Great. Let me throw in 10K, 20K, even though they're just an employee. They're not an owner of the company or anything. But like, it is a wild thing for a human being to do who's a non-professional climber. And I think that's how people successfully still raise money to go and do these climbs.
All right. We're moving into the training and physical preparation away from the financial side. Can these techniques be built in a 2 to 3 year span?
Yeah, presuming we're talking about the techniques and experience necessary to climb Mount Everest, can it be done in a 2 to 3 year span from having no mountaineering experience? And the short answer is yes. That's kind of a perfect length of time, 3 years, I'd say, for most climbers. Most climbers who can afford time and money to do, let's say, 2 international expeditions per year, a 3 year path to building experience and to making sure that you like it enough and you enjoy the suffering. It's about the right amount of time. So, clients, members with Alpenglow, these are our favorite phone calls, right? Someone calls, they have no experience whatsoever. They think they want to climb Mount Everest. Now, because in the media, they think they want to go straight to Mount Everest. And we kind of hopefully are able to sculpt that path that actually it's going to be stepping stones to get to Mount Everest. You're going to first go to like a Shasta or something else in the US. Then you're going to go to Ecuador or Mexico and get 6,000 meter experience on a glacier. Then you're going to do another 6,000 meter type trip, whether that's on Elbrus in Russia once that reopens and is safe to go to, or maybe it's Bolivia, maybe it's Nepal for the first time, getting this more 6,000 meter experience. Then you're going to go do some ice climbing in Uray. You're going to go do some rock climbing in a place like the Sierra or the Tetons. Then you're going to go to 7,000 meters, somewhere like Aconcagua or Ojos de Salado or Peak Lenin in Kyrgyzstan. And then in a perfect world, you're going to go to a lower 8,000 meter peak like Cho Yu. It's a step that more and more people are skipping, but there is absolutely no question your success rate on Everest is higher if you've been to an 8,000 meter peak and learned how to use oxygen and work within the Sherpa system. And then you go to Everest. So that can definitely be done in 2 to 3 years if you have the time. I've had someone do it in 12 months who had recently retired, kids out to college, and a very understanding partner. And they did all of that in a year and was successful on Everest. More common is 3 years. And then on the other end, there's the people who maybe don't have the financial or time ability, and it takes 7 or 8 years with one trip a year, but they keep plugging away at it and fundraising for Everest and eventually get there.
And then there's the people that do it for a lifetime because they truly love climbing. And it doesn't matter if it's Mount Everest is the goal or just climbing, but that can be Mount Everest is just one stop on a long, long path.
Absolutely. I mean, certainly many people come with this dream. Most people who have the dream of climbing Everest never get there because they don't love it enough, and that's okay. Hopefully, they have some amazing experiences along the way. And then loads of people who think they're going to climb Mount Everest and then move on to something else, actually, like you're speaking to, fall in love with it. And then they're calling Alpenglow trying to figure out, what can I do after Everest? Like what are the other 8,000 meter peaks, or what are more technical but lower peaks I can do? Or how can I start gaining more independence to be able to go to much, much easier peaks like Denali or something like that, but on my own without a guide? So yeah, hopefully, of course, it becomes a lifelong pursuit. And yeah, we also see those people that have been climbing for 20 years, not with mountain guides, and then finally are at a place in their life where they can afford to do something like Everest. And they come to us to finally do Everest, which is guided, even though a lot of their climbing in the past has been unguided. So there's a lot of different paths, hopefully, that do center around like learning to passionately love this experience that changes people.
So we'll call that the technical preparation. How about the physical preparation? And what is the best way that you believe someone can physically prepare for a trip like Mount Everest at home?
Physical preparation is so, so important. And there are lots of great coaches out there. Alpenglow works with Billy Goat Swift, that coaches a lot of our clients. I personally work with Scott Johnston at Evoke Endurance for my biggest climbs. So there's great books out there like Training for the New Alpinism. So there's a lot of material out there for how to train. The key is, of course, cardiovascular endurance training, being able to put in long, long days in kind of zone 2 range. So if you're in New York City, Of course, you're going to be spending a lot of time in the gym. We have clients this year from New York City, from Miami, lots of sea level places without mountains. A lot of their training is in the gym, and it's mostly low intensity stuff. But then it is just incredibly important that these climbers find ways to do long, what I would call real non gym based workouts. In Miami and New York, that might be 80-story tall buildings going up stairwells and then taking elevators back down, then going up stairwells again and elevators back down. That is a fantastic way to train. In New York, it might also be like going 2 hours out of the city to the Catskills, upstate New York, like actually going outside and having to do 6, 8, 10 hour days on trails, because there are so many little things that you learn when you're doing that, from nutrition to hydration to layering to all the little muscles in your feet and legs that work on unstable terrain that you don't work on a Stairmaster or even inside in a building. So it is incredibly important to be getting out for those longer days in what I would call real terrain, even if you don't live in the American West.
You just answered the next question already, right there. How to prepare in places where mountains aren't accessible. Moving on to the next one. What are physical benchmarks to assess yourself?
I mean, I think the physical benchmarks are really the smaller mountain trips that you're going to do along the way to Everest. That is the single place to test yourself. Like, can you go to Ecuador and do 6,000 meter, 20,000 foot peaks with summit days in the like 8 to 14 hour range? And can you do them like well, smoothly, taking care of yourself? Doesn't mean you don't need to be guided. Like someone else might be making some of the risk mitigation and management decisions for you. That's your mountain guide, but that you're able to put those big efforts in. And especially eventually, a big benchmark is putting multi day efforts in. So, mountains, like for instance, in Ecuador, are often 1 day climbs. That's not enough. You need to be able to go to mountains where you have to do, let's say, 4 days in a row of really hard work. So that's more like an Aconcagua or a Denali or a Peak Lenin, where you're carrying a pretty big backpack and setting up multiple camps and moving progressively up the mountain. Because we find a lot, like we've seen quite a bit in the past, really successful like Ironman triathletes or really excellent marathon runners, but they do 1 day. And usually when they go into that 1 day, they're at their best physically. They've peaked, they've tapered, they've slept, they've gotten massages, they've eaten really well. Well, in the big mountains, you sleep like shit, you can't eat, you're at high altitude, a storm's raging, and suddenly no one's giving you a massage. And now you need to put your days together and still perform. And that's a different thing. So, a big benchmark is these multi day expeditions where you need to work hard a few days in a row.
Should you aim for a specific VO2 max before climbing Everest?
Fans and are horrified that like none of the guides have any idea what their VO2 maxes are. I have no idea if a higher VO2 max actually relates to better performance in the mountains, and it's certainly not something we test.
If you're Tyler Andrews, you know your VO2 max for sure.
Yeah, but you might just know it because you're from your running background and you hope it means something in the mountains. But whether it actually does or not, I'm
Exactly.
not sure there's any data out there to suggest it correlates. Certainly, when I was trying to do my no oxygen climbs and I was working with a high end coach and nutritionist in a sports performance lab at the UC Davis, at University of California, Davis, I was getting my VO2 max tested along with lots of other things. But you've probably heard about this. What I found for me, and everyone's different, was the thing I needed to focus on was my fat adaptation more than anything else. So I was doing a lot of testing around fat adaptation month after month after month. So different athletes are going to need different things. It's not to say VO2 max or other sort of like very specific sports testing isn't interesting and that I would love to see more data around it. But right now, anything anyone claims is anecdotal.
Yeah, I think on that note, like physical benchmarks to assess yourself was a previous question. And I think comparing yourself to previous fitness levels that you have and using VO2 max or heart rate zones or pace on a trail run or whatever can be a good physical benchmark. But you should only be comparing yourself against yourself from a previous year or a previous time. You shouldn't be comparing my VO2 max to your VO2 max because it could have absolutely no correlation because we're different human beings.
Absolutely.
All right. Does the training timeline change based on age? Can someone in their 40s or 50s start from scratch?
Yeah, so absolutely, someone in their 40s or 50s can start from scratch, and that's certainly what I'd say a lot of Alpenglow's team members are. They kind of came, they've been really high end athletes and oftentimes in or good athletes in other sports and activities, and something attracted them to climbing and mountaineering when they had more time and financial ability. The reality is these trips just take so much time that it's often in your 40s or 50s when you finally have that time to focus. So certainly it's possible to start later. It really helps, of course, if you have a base of like liking athletics and having learned how to train and do hard things when you're younger, whether your sport was, tennis or rowing or, any of the traditional sports, or if it was cycling, running, things like that. It helps to know how to train and to know your body. But even that can be overcome with proper coaching. I do absolutely think training kind of like standards, best practices change as you get older. And this is something I'm even learning myself. Like just the importance of rest just grows and grows and grows as we age. And in order to be high performing endurance athletes in our, 40s and beyond, learning how and when to rest to actually make performance gains is essential. And that's where I found like I really needed to work with a coach because I always thought like the person who trains the hardest and the most volume wins. And that's not necessarily true, especially as we age.
All right. What is the best way to get into mountaineering in the UK?
Oh, in the UK, see, I should know this since I'm originally from the UK, but unfortunately, I moved when I was 6 years old to the United States. So I was quite young.
So moving
But
to the
I,
US is the
yeah,
answer.
move to the US. No, not at all. I mean, the UK has an incredible history of alpinism and actually a real focus on high altitude climbing. There are so many Brits who have been very, very good high altitude climbers. I think most of us think that Brits have a tendency to be pretty good at suffering. Kind of stoic, quiet suffering is something the Brits are quite good at. And that's a great match for high altitude climbing. If I had to guess, probably you're doing hiking in kind of the highlands of the UK. You're eventually getting to Scotland, where some of the hardest, gnarliest winter climbing in the world exists because the conditions are so hard, even though the mountains aren't very hard. So, great place to build training in kind of like difficult winter conditions, which is what we face on the high peaks. Then you're probably going to go to the Alps, which is, a short train ride or Ryanair flight away to start building some of the technical skills, crampons, ice axes, rock climbing. No better place in the world than the Alps for that. And then your closest high altitude peaks might be in Russia, if and when it's possible to travel there again. And then you're kind of equidistant from Asia or South America, and you can choose where you go to start doing your 6,000 and 7,000 meter peaks. But I think great training ground from everything I understand in the UK.
All right. Can you go from a 6,000 meter peak like Le Boucher to an 8,000 meter peak?
What a great question at this moment in time, because there are a very large number of what I would argue are unethical companies that would love to take you from Lobuche Peak or Island Peak or Cotopaxi or even only Kilimanjaro straight to an 8,000 meter peak, straight to Everest. There are just dozens of companies out there that would joyfully take your money. The reality is your likelihood of summiting is incredibly low, and the companies that will accept you don't care about that because they make the money whether you summit or not. And you'll often hear them in interviews saying things like, we're just here to provide support. The client chooses whether they're ready or not, which I just think is total horseshit. But so, yes, there are lots of people who do that. I cannot more strongly recommend not doing it. You are not ready to have a high chance of success, to have a high likelihood of safety if the shit hits the fan, and to have fun. You're just going to be struggling the whole time. And my philosophy is you shouldn't come to these mountains until you can be a competent team member. That doesn't mean you're the team leader. It doesn't mean you're the mountain guide. It doesn't mean you've dedicated your life to this. But when the storm's raging and a tent needs to get set up and snow needs to be melted for water and a Sherpa, twist their ankle, you can actually competently assist in all those situations instead of maybe being another potential problem that the team leaders have to support, right? Like, can you be an asset in all those situations? That only comes through experience on taller and taller mountains. And believe me, Everest is going to mean so much more to you once you've put in more time. So my goal, it's hard to say bare minimum, but like if I could, I'd say, 3 to 5 6,000 meter peaks, one 7,000 meter peak, plus technical ice climbing and technical rock climbing, multi pitch is a bare minimum before going to Everest.
All right. Talk about Manaslu versus Makalu as preparation and objective hazard on each peak go.
That's an interesting one. I mean, the two names are similar, but they're not really like equatable peaks, Manaslu and Makalu. Manaslu and Cho-Oyu would probably be a better comparison. But I guess to try to answer the question, like, because I think probably this comes from somewhere in past interviews, I've said that I think Makalu is safer than Manaslu. Makalu is a much, much more difficult mountain. It's the fifth tallest mountain in the world instead of the eighth tallest like Manaslu. It has a lot of very steep climbing that can often be rock climbing and or ice climbing, as well as long open snow slopes. So it is not to be underestimated. It is one of the really hard 8,000 meter peaks, Makalu is, but it has no real big ice falls, no serac hazard ever above you. And so some of the objective hazards on the mountain are less dangerous than, let's say, a Manaslu. So it's probably why I've talked about it more. When I decided not to go to Manaslu anymore back in 2012, but Cho-Oyu was closed, the sixth tallest mountain in Tibet, I took my team to Makalu, but it really isn't a beginner or introductory 8,000 meter peak. It's much better for more experienced climbers. Cho-Oyu is the peak I'd really compare with Manaslu as being a similar altitude, similar type of climbing, mostly broad snow slopes with occasional steep steps, but remarkably safer because of very low avalanche danger. Manaslu is just incredibly high risk for huge avalanches that are difficult to predict. And that's why Alpenglow and I stopped running Manaslu after 4 years on the mountain. Twice during those 4 years, I saw entire camps wiped out. So it's just pure luck whether people were in those camps or not. And eventually in 2012, I can't remember how many people were killed, but a lot were killed in an avalanche where everyone was in Camp 2 and Camp 3 just sleeping in their tents. And many climbers were killed. Manaslu is not a mountain I'd recommend lightly.
All right, dropping down to 7,000-meter preparation peaks, would you recommend someone climb Ojos del Salado or Peak Lenin to prepare for Everest?
Great question. I mean, either I would say are acceptable because when you're going to a 7,000 meter peak, you're really just trying to test your body without oxygen to that altitude because that's kind of the best test you can do to know that then on oxygen, you should be able to go above 8,000 meters. So altitude being the most important, either of those peaks, Ojos de Salado or Peak Lenin, are appropriate. But if you want to build mountain skills in addition to testing your altitude, then Peak Lenin is the far better choice. Ojos, the truth is we can drive four-wheel drive cars to within a few hundred meters of the summit, and it's predominantly just hiking, just walking on scree or sand with a little bit of rock climbing at the very top. It's an awesome experience. And I would recommend it is one of the wildest places on the planet in this high desert in Chile. But you're not really using crampons. You're not working on snow. You're not thinking about crevasses. You're not doing multiple days of hard expedition camping. You're not carrying a big backpack. Peak Lenin is all those things that Ojos isn't. It's a multi-day, huge expedition peak to 7,000 meters where you're on glaciers the entire time. Today's podcast is brought to you by Alpenglow Expeditions, a Tahoe-based guide company with an international reputation. In its 20th year of operations, Alpenglow leads the highest quality expeditions in some of the world's greatest mountain ranges, from California's High Sierra to the rugged Himalaya. Alpenglow runs more than 40 international expeditions per year, as well as offering a full menu of guided ski and climbing courses throughout California. Join us and experience the Alpenglow difference.
All right, we're moving on. New category. How do you seek out mentors in the climbing world?
Mentorship in the climbing world is so important, right? Like my career has been in large part just 2 or 3 different mentors through my life have given me so much to get where I am today. And mountaineering is just a really hard thing to break into. And so, of course, guide companies in some part fill that void. Like if you don't have a huge amount of time to find a mentor, that's what mountain guides often are for their clients. A lot of our mountain guides at Alpenglow Expeditions, like they're climbing with the same clients over a period of years, and they're providing mentorship, and they're not only like talking to each other when they're on a paid trip. They're texting and chatting and having a real relationship that's built around the mountains throughout those years, helping the mentee, the climber, to also make good decisions when they're going out, not in a guided kind of realm. And so those mountain friendships become mentorships really naturally between mountain guide and clients. So I think that's the single easiest way to find that. The other way, of course, is just to spend a lot of time in the places that climbers hang out. So that's climbing gyms, it's your local crags, it's the backcountry ski trailheads that are really popular. It's the few places in the United States where ice climbing happens, right? Like Cody and Uray and Lake Placid in the Adirondacks and up in New Hampshire. Like, if you hang out in those places for long enough, you're going to meet people and get kind of brought into these communities. But that can be a much slower and longer process, or a more difficult process for someone with a really high end job and a family and things like that. And that's where mountain guide mentors really come in. I mean, Sam, I think you probably play that role for quite a few people in your world, maybe a little more on the ski side. But don't you see that you're not only a mountain guide, but also a mentor?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that it has shifted over time, certainly. But, how to find mentors, it's like, do the thing, right? If you're looking for a backcountry ski mentor, go backcountry skiing. If you're looking for a climbing mentor, go climbing. Unfortunately, there's no forums, there's no Facebook groups for this. You got to be in the environments to find those people. I'm not sure on this question. What first made us decide to climb Mount Everest from the north side? Maybe was there a pivotal moment for you that really forced you to commit to climbing out of the north side of Mount Everest as opposed to the south side?
Oh, yeah, 100%. So my first few years of climbing were actually on the south side after a north side trip was canceled in 2008 due to the Beijing Olympics. So then I was on the south side from 2009 until 2014. And there was sort of a pivotal moment. But first, what happened is I went through the Khumbu Icefall 38 times over those 5 years on the south side of the mountain, and I almost died twice. So I started getting pretty uncomfortable with the South Side. I dug out multiple bodies from other different teams, not my own, luckily, during those few years on the South Side, mostly Sherpa. And I started to realize two things. Number one, that as an expedition leader, if I was going to go to the mountain for 20 years and I was going to bring on average, 15 to 20 Sherpa and mountain guides each year, if you do the math, based on the fatality rate in the icefall, there is no way I couldn't have fatalities of people I had hired. And that's a real burden to carry, especially when there is another alternative that I was hearing so much about from one of my mentors, actually, Russell Bryce, speaking of mentors, who used to guide on the north side of the mountain. And so there was that side of starting to do the math of fatalities amongst my team, potential fatalities amongst my team. There was a really pivotal moment where I was guiding 6 clients going through the ice fall, and we had a large avalanche off the west shoulder above us. And the only thing I could do was unclip from the fixed ropes, yell to my clients to run, and hope they ran in the right direction. And we all ultimately survived, but with people getting hit by chunks of ice, a massive wind blast from the avalanche, one person pushed into a crevasse, but we all got out and we're okay. But I was like, wait, is that mountain guiding? Yelling run and then saving my own life? So there was that side as well, thinking about my clients and what my clients' expectation are, or my clients' families' expectations are when they join a trip with a professional mountain guide in an amazing company. Like, they expect us to mitigate risks that we can mitigate. And what I realized was the only way to mitigate the risk of the icefall was to no longer climb through it. Other than that, it's just luck. It's just random luck. Some of the best climbers in the world, some Sherpa that I know and love, have been killed in the icefall, not due to their own fault, by luck. So those things all happened. So I started trying to sell through Alpenglow. In 2012, I started trying to sell the north side instead of the south side. Unfortunately, because when social media and all the storytelling around Mount Everest came to be in the early, 2009, 10, 11, 12, there were no north side expeditions. So literally the market just had no understanding of what we were talking about, or why you would want to go to that side, or what it looked like. We could not sell the north side. I and Alpenglow tried so hard. That was true in 2012. That was true in 2013. In 2014, unfortunately, the icefall accident happened that killed 19 Sherpa in a single avalanche in the icefall. And the news was mainstream. Non-climbers heard about it. Everyone knew about it. I mean, it was a mass casualty event of employees in the ice fall, and it was terrible. The one silver lining was finally I could go to my market, the Alpenglow potential client market, and say, this is what I've been trying to say for the last 2 years. Now, does it make sense? Will you take this risk with me and go to the north side, even though you really don't understand what it means? And you just hear it's hotter and colder. And by 2000, because of that icefall accident in 2015, we were able to have a full team on the north side. And we've never returned to the south side. Even during COVID, when the north side was closed, like at that point, I was able to say financially, like, sure, like we're going to miss millions of dollars of revenue, but we're not going back.
What is your favorite section of the mountain to climb aside from reaching the summit?
What a great question. I mean, on the north side, you said it's not the summit, but like summit day on the north side is one of the wildest days of climbing you can do anywhere, because you leave camp at 27,000 feet, 8,300 meters, and you climb for an hour or maybe 2 hours up the face. You're in the dark. It's steep, but not super technical and not like wild. It's just grinding. You're just grinding. You finish that grind when you top onto the northeast ridge. And like, no exaggeration, you're on a knife edge ridge the size of a sidewalk, and it's dropping, 9,000 feet down the Kinchin face on your left side and 11,000 feet down the north face on your right side. And it's just so unlikely that there is a safe and relatively moderate path of climbing along this ridge, sometimes fully overhanging one side or the other. You have to be super aware of cornices, big mushroom snow blobs. You're not actually standing and going to fall potentially down one side or the other. Sometimes you have to drop down and do some rock climbing down low and then come back up. And eventually, as you're going along that ridge line, the sun rises. And because of the time zone where we're in, the sunrise is actually it gets light at like 4 a.m. and the sun rises around 5 a.m. And like, you're always on this knife edge ridge during that time. And like, there is nothing like it on the planet that can explain that feeling, especially if you've worked for months for this, trained for years for this, fundraised for years, maybe dreamt of it. So many of my climbers have dreamt about being here since the 1996 tragedy in the Into Thin Air book and the IMAX film, just like I did. To finally be there in that place, like, I mean, it's magic. I can't wait to do it again.
Just a couple weeks.
I hope.
All right. What experiences have you seen on Everest that shook you to your core and have stayed with you?
I mean, shoot, could fill a book of those moments. I mean, I think that's why I keep coming back. And as you can imagine, they're the really high moments and the really low moments. So, maybe to start with the low and hopefully end on a high note with this question. I mean, the reality of Everest is maybe only in war, which is non-voluntary, versus this thing we're doing is super voluntary, but there's nowhere else where we see as much death as we see here. I've had a Sherpa die in my arms waiting for a helicopter to try to get them back out of the ice fall. I've dug more bodies up than I like to think about. I've done carries for other teams of people with pulmonary or cerebral edema before helicopters could get high, and had people die in a litter as we're still carrying them. These are hard, dark human experiences, because every one of those individuals has people that love them so much. And it's just so painful to see that level of loss and to experience it. And it's very much a reality of this mountain. And I think it gets lost sometimes in mainstream media. The mountain is easy. The mountain is anyone can go. The people who die made horrible mistakes. Sometimes that's true, but there's always going to be a level of death here that happens just because it is one of the hardest places on the planet to survive. And we're still not changing that. Even as we kind of, take away some of the rough edges, we haven't changed that. And so the lows really are all around that. And I guess the secondary lows which also ties to the highs, is when I see teams not work well together. I've seen teams fall apart on the mountain through like personality conflicts and things like that. And those are just painful, sad moments where we have just failed. This is not so much in the client like Alpenglow realm, but more in like the personal climbing realm. But like, when a team truly fails, it is sad, because we're all there to do this amazing thing. And when we can't put together the human pieces, I find that really kind of painful as well. And then moving on to the high points, of course, I've had a personal high point, achieving a life dream of climbing Everest without supplemental oxygen. That took me years and years of building experience with supplemental oxygen and then 2 years of trying without. And the moment on top was actually not that all powerful because I was so fucked. I couldn't even like stand up for my photos. But 43 hours later, after a single 43-hour push, rolling back into advanced base camp alive at 2 a.m. and having the dozen people who had supported me to make that possible, from cooks to porters to Sherpa to filmers, like it's other than my wedding and birth of my son, is just the most powerful moment of my life. Like feeling that love and support and celebration that made that possible for me. Like I think about it now and I'm like, oh man, that was real. And then I get pieces of that so many times through the clients that I've guided on the mountain. Like people ask about coming back, and there's a lot of reasons I come back year after year after year. But one of them is like, there is just no doubt in my mind that this experience changes people and generally changes people for the good. Many times, people who have everything and have done everything, and yet this experience, how hard it is, how dangerous it is, how many years of their lives they've invested in it, when they achieve it, being able to knowing that I was a part of that and that like maybe it wouldn't have happened without me and my team, like it's a high point. I thrive on it.
All right. Changing gears a little bit, do you think the West Ridge could be climbed from the glacier with fixed ropes?
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I'm not sure where that question's exactly coming from. I mean, sure. I mean, just about any route that has been climbed on the planet could be siege styled. It could be climbed with fixed ropes. That doesn't mean it would be safe, right? Like if you put a fixed rope up a massive under loads of seracs like we do on K2 under the bottleneck, like it's fucking heinous. But can you do it? Sure. I see no reason why the West Ridge couldn't be climbed in that style. I'm just not sure why it would be. Like, it's clearly more difficult than the current normal routes. And generally, routes are fixed for non professional climbers that want a reasonable way up the mountain. And that's why these two routes have kind of formed. I'm trying to think if someone's thinking like maybe you could avoid the ice fall and go up the low La and then up the West Ridge and avoid the ice fall and the risk of that. Maybe they're thinking something like that. And there's been a lot of attempts over the past few years of people trying to figure out ways to avoid the ice fall. No one has yet found a way that makes it safer. Like going up to the low La to begin the West Ridge is really dangerous. And or, Marc Batard, this famous French climber, has been trying to avoid the ice fall by going around on Nuptse, on the face of Nuptse. But it's super dangerous over there with massive rock fall. And so I'm not sure an easier way has been, or a safer way has been found.
Well, kind of on that note, do you think climate change will eventually make the Khumbu icefall impassable?
Yeah, it's funny if you put 10 climbers in a room together, some will say that climate change is ultimately going to collapse the entire ice fall and there might be a really bad period, but then one day it'll be safer because it'll be gone. I don't think that's going to be in my lifetime, but I could see the kind of like theory around it. And then the other way I think is the much more likely. Right now, what we're seeing, I think, is a loss of permafrost, especially on the walls above the ice fall. And so those walls are getting more active with more avalanches as big serac fall, rock fall, things like that are occurring. I think, at least for a while, from what I can see, so I climbed on the south side from 2009 to 2014. And then obviously I've stayed really involved for the past decade. It's currently getting worse, not better. And I think that trend will continue, at least in my climbing lifetime. I don't know if that leads to a next question of, so what do we do?
No,
I
no,
think,
you're cut off.
well, okay.
But I do have a follow up. Or I guess I would say, would you agree that the ice fall is not necessarily the hazard, but the speed at which you have to travel through the ice fall is the hazard because it exposes you to the overhead hazard outside of the ice fall for longer?
Well, no, I mean, clearly the hazard is the ice fall, but the only way to mitigate that hazard is how little time you spend in it. So, best practice, if you
Yeah,
ask me, of course, is what I decided, which is we're going to spend no time in it. There's another equally fun route with none of that hazard. So, we're going to choose that. That's zero time. If you're not going to make
fair.
that choice, if you're going to stay on the south side, then what you said is absolutely correct. the fewer hours, combined hours you spend in the icefall is the only way to lessen the hazard of that icefall. All this, oh, we time it, we go in the morning, we go in the night. There's now been plenty of data to show there is no safer time. That's all like smoke and mirrors to make us feel better about it, which I do too. Don't get me wrong. The one single thing you can do is less time. So that's why you are seeing companies do fewer trips through the icefall, acclimatize in other places. Russell Bryce pioneered back in the early 2000s with me, or around 2010, no longer acclimatizing on Mount Everest, but acclimatizing on another peak called Lobuche. So that you only had to do 2 trips through the icefall, 2 up, 2 down as a client, instead of 4 up, 4 down is what we used to do. So you're reducing number of times. For Sherpa, the way to reduce number of times through the icefall is to carry less shit up there. And all of those things might be getting to maybe what you're thinking a little bit. If we have members on the teams with more experience, they need less shit to keep them alive above the ice falls. That's fewer trips for the Sherpa. And they go through the ice fall faster because they're more experienced on their crampons and on fixed ropes, and they're fitter, hopefully, through all that experience they've gained. So therefore, they and their Sherpa or mountain guides can spend fewer hours going through the ice fall. That does make it safer. And I think that's maybe where the question started.
All right. Have you seen or experienced any lines in the death zone on the north side of Mount Everest?
You know, it's interesting. So this is a no, but with a caveat. So the most popular years on the north side were actually 2005, 6, and 7. In the early 2000s, the north side was quite a bit more popular than the south side with more climbers. The busiest years on the north side with, 250 climbers supported by 250 Sherpa were in those early 2000s. And at that time, lines on the north side were not uncommon, especially at the technical steps. So there's a first step, second step, and third step, all kind of rock climbing. And the second step specifically is like 510 rock climbing. So there's actually ladders to help make it easier. But it's very difficult to have a route down and a route up through that like laddered technical section. And people used to really worry about lines there and have to consider how many summit attempts there were, how many people were going each day and choose appropriate days and things like that. So that was a thing. But after Tibet closed for the Beijing Olympics in 2008, and the business really entirely moved to the south side, and then social media, Instagram, Facebook popularized the south side. Ever since then, the north side has never had that number of climbers. I think the busiest year I've ever been here was 160 foreign climbers with 160 Tibetan and Nepali Sherpas supporting. And those numbers on the north side, where the weather is much better because we're on the lee side of all the bad weather, I've just never seen traffic jams on the mountain. But China has said they will allow up to 300 foreign climbers is their cap, still far less than Nepal, but far more than we have today. If they ever reach that cap of 300 foreign climbers with 300 supporters, there is potential for lines. And that's where you need to ensure, if you're a member, a non-professional climber, that you're with certified mountain guides with loads of experience who can leave the fixed ropes and do things like set up our own rappels to move people around bottlenecks. And that's still the biggest problem on the south side. Like, is it easy to say there's too many climbers on the south side? Of course. There's probably 450 foreign climbers supported by 750 Sherpas, so 1,200, 1,300 climbers. It's easy to say that's too many. But if you look at the other popular mountains in the world, that's not necessarily too many. It's the level of inexperience of both the members and the guides leading those members that's creating, I think, all the problems. The years I guided on the south side, I never had an issue with crowds because I and my fellow guides were always able to short rope, leave the fixed ropes with ice axes, with experienced clients, and climb around bottlenecks. We just never, it just was not a problem. And that should be and still is the truth today with the experienced teams with IFMGA certified mountain guides.
What's the hardest part of climbing from the north side?
I'd say the hardest part of the route on the north side is those technical steps above 8,000 meters. We're wearing crampons. We have fixed ropes, but we're doing real rock climbing. The first step's probably 5.4 or 5.5. Second step has ladders, but would be 5.10 plus. The third step is like this weird, probably like 5.2 chimney, but it's a real chimney. And you're wearing crampons on rock. And so that's a skill that a lot of people don't practice. They wear crampons when they go to Ouray ice climbing or on the glacier on Mount Rainier and never any other time. And here we really need to have a crampon on rock experience. And kind of learning those skills at 28,000 feet is just plain hard and incredibly physical. As we see, all the time, it's all about managing breath and your heart rate's not going above, let's say, 155 or something like that. And then you hit one of these steps, and all of a sudden, you don't want to make a hold up for the rest of your teammates. All of a sudden, your heart rate's, 205, and you're completely maxing on hard rock with thousands of feet of air below you. They're not long steps, but they are very memorable.
All right, we got some themes here. Is it better to attempt a potentially more technical route to avoid lines? How major of a safety threat are long lines to the summit?
Well, I kind of just said, like, with good mountain guides, you should be able to manage lines, but more people do increase risk. It just is the case, mostly because one of the biggest reasons, other than the icefall, that I wanted to leave the south side is that my team, which was really well resourced with super experienced mountain guides, super experienced Sherpa, loads of oxygen and medical supplies, and an expedition doctor who's maybe the most talented on the planet. What it meant was my team was being sucked into rescues of less experienced climbers stuck in lines, running out of oxygen, things like that. We were sucked into rescues almost daily. And then we had to make decisions. Do our resources go to our clients who paid really good money to be on the best resource team on the mountain? Or do our resources go to someone who might not survive? Where there's moral and ethical questions there, but they're not as easy as sitting at home, someone might think, when you see it day after day after day, and your guides and your Sherpa are just exhausted from doing rescues for people who shouldn't have been there in the first place. And so that's where I see, coming to a much quieter side of the mountain, like, all of that just goes away. Of course, we help each other if a team needs help, but the numbers, it's just a matter of numbers. That happens so rarely here. And the Chinese are much stricter on which companies they allow into Tibet and onto the north side of Everest. So we're just getting to focus so much more on what we love, which is guiding our team to a positive outcome.
All right, sticking with the theme here, it's almost like the media portrays Mount Everest as having long lines. Are there
Yeah,
lines
funny
on
that.
Cho Yu?
That's a good question. Not really. I mean, specifically the last few years, Cho Yu, again, because of people being afraid that Tibet won't open. So Cho Yu's been really quiet as well, with all the climbers going to Manaslu. I do expect that to change as people gain. This is now our third season with no issues with visas or anything like that in Tibet. So I hope people are gaining confidence in China as a partner and us being able to climb here in the Himalaya. And so more people will be coming to Cho Yu. The nice thing about Cho Yu is there's really only two technical steps, one called the Ice Cliff just above Camp 1 and one called the Yellow Band just above Camp 3. Those are the only places you could bottleneck, because the rest of the mountain is so good for doing what we were talking about, like climbing separately from the fixed lines as a, like, almost like glacier rope team. There's just a lot of room up there.
All right. What are your thoughts on climbing Everest in the fall post monsoon season to avoid the lines?
Yeah, what a great question. I mean, the short answer is I love it. And I think a lot more people should try it. The caveat to that is there is no doubt that the fall season has far lower success rates than the spring season. Commercially, I watched Wally Berg, famous Canadian guide with a company named Berg International, 7 years in a row run autumn trips and not once be successful. I've seen Madison Mountaineering try to run a fall trip and not be successful. I've seen a lot of my friends, professional athletes, try in the autumn and not be successful. The weather window where the jet stream leaves, you have low wind, but you don't have stormy, snowy weather, is just way less consistent in the fall. That's why there are still seasons in the fall when no one summits any 8,000 meter peak, never mind Everest, any of them. Everest being so expensive, it's hard to persuade people to take that much higher risk. But as the mountain gets busier, I hope, on both sides, I think climbers who are willing to go for a rowdier adventure should consider the autumn. It is rowdy.
There we go. All right, switching gears again. Do you do daily pulse ox checks to track acclimatization? And if you're well acclimatized, will your pulse ox be the same as it would be at sea level?
We'll never see pulse ox numbers like we see at sea level, ever. pretty rare for people ever to get back into the 90s once they're at base camp here at 17,000 feet for the rest of the trip. So if you're at home and you walked into the emergency room not in the 90s, you're definitely going in on oxygen and being admitted. But for us here, that's just normal. If I'm in the mid to high 80s, like I'm killing it and I'm ready to go move to the next altitude. But progressively, that number of what that great number is goes down as we go up. So by the time I'm at ABC at 21,000 feet, I'll never see saturations higher than the mid 80s again. And that will be my benchmark. So, a couple of things though, we're just diving right in. This is oxygen saturation numbers, basically out of 100%, how effectively your hemoglobin and red blood cells are binding to oxygen and carrying oxygen around your body. It's one marker of acclimatization. It's not the only marker. We never use the number on its own. We use the number combined with what we call the Lake Louise AMS score, acute mountain sickness score. So things like, do we have headaches or not? Do we have nausea or not? How did we sleep? What our fatigue levels are? The pulse ox number, mine's right here, is just one small part of that puzzle. We do generally try to get baselines from people. So that means usually daily oxygen saturation numbers, but not like in a big group competing. Your number, Sam, has no relation to my number when we're at the same altitude. We're just going to present differently. Sherpa generally have really low oxygen saturation numbers, but because they have so many more red blood cells than us, even though each one is less oxygenated, they're still ultimately pumping way more oxygen. And so they'll have low sats, but be doing way better than we are in acclimatization. And so the fine line is not allowing it to become a competition or a downer for someone with lower numbers or higher numbers, but to find your own trends.
Are any people on the team taking Diamox the entire time?
That's a good question. Diamox is a drug that helps us, a prescription drug that helps us with our body's natural acclimatization. It doesn't mask symptoms. It actually speeds the body's acclimatization with very few negative side effects. And so it is pretty common for people to have learned from a guide or from their GP at home, like take Diamox the whole time. This is something we kind of fight against at Alpenglow expeditions, because if an expedition is well set up on a smart schedule with climbers who have worked hard to be here and proven they can climb at altitude, Diamox shouldn't be necessary. And so we want to use it more of a treatment. It becomes necessary when someone has a bad day. Maybe someone gets a cold, and so it's harder for them to acclimatize, and so they need a boost. So we don't encourage using it the entire time, and especially not starting it before you arrive. But with that said, since it has so few side effects and its positive effects are so clear and well documented over many decades, it's sometimes hard when climbers have learned about it and used it on their past trips to now all of a sudden be on the biggest trip of their lives and not use it. So it's not uncommon for us to have a couple of people taking it the entire trip. As long as we know about it, we can then adjust our expectations of that climber based on their using that prescription drug. And we can also plan what we're going to do differently if and when they still have trouble and have acute mountain sickness, how we're going to treat it differently based on the fact they're on Diamox. So we don't forbid it. The key is that we have really open communication with our members to be able to make those logical decisions around it.
All right. Have you ever had anyone climb Everest with sleep apnea?
Yeah, of course. Sleep apnea is just one of the most common symptoms of altitude sickness that we see in the big mountains. So essentially getting a carbon dioxide, as I understand it, non-scientific doctors don't at me, like carbon dioxide buildup kind of in the brainstem. So our body starts getting mixed signals of when it needs to breathe, and we actually stop breathing momentarily. It's not dangerous, but the climber will stop breathing for anywhere from 15 seconds, 30 seconds, 60 seconds. And then, of course, you're at a deficit of oxygen. So you all of a sudden start breathing really hard, gasping, often wake yourself up, or at the very least wake all your tent mates up. And it's really scary for the tent mates. This is just a common high altitude symptom. Diamox is actually a very effective treatment of this specific symptom if someone's experiencing it and it's starting to affect their sleep quality.
And would you have any concerns accepting a member that struggles with sleep apnea at sea level, granted that it will likely get worse as they raise their elevation?
Yeah, I think, it's something this is why we have an expedition doctor on our team, Monica Pires, to kind of vet everyone's individual medical scenarios. Most likely, we would want to see how that sleep apnea had affected that climber on other high altitude peaks. Let's say one of the beauties of one of the reasons we require a 23,000 foot peak, a 7,000 meter peak, not on oxygen, is because it means you have to sleep at 20,000 feet in that scenario on that mountain. You're going to learn a lot about how your body works there. And those are the types of questions we're going to be asking you.
Have you ever had anyone climb that's epileptic?
I have not ever had anyone on one of my teams who is epileptic. And I'm not sure whether people have. That's an interesting question. I'm not familiar. Again, I think it would probably have a lot to do with how well managed it was. When we at Alpenglow have had people with clear long-term health issues of one kind of another want to climb the biggest mountains in the world, it usually has a lot to do with how well they can manage their symptoms in survival situations, because that's essentially what we might put ourselves in. People who can well manage their disease or illness or injury or whatever it might be often can perform well on Mount Everest. But if someone hasn't built a lot of that experience elsewhere, I might not recommend it.
All right, switching gears again. Do you bring summit snacks, and how do you stay fueled on summit day?
Yeah, so of course I bring summit snacks, but fueling is hard at altitude, especially no oxygen or for someone struggling with the amount of oxygen. Essentially, our digestive systems are considered kind of like optional when we're fighting for our lives, as compared to like our heart, lungs, and brains, which are not optional. So oxygen and blood flow get shunted to the required systems, the heart, lungs, brain, and away from the digestive system. So we fight a lot with nausea and things like that up high. So the key to summit snacks are figuring out what works for your body when you're in those really stressed situations. And they're really different for different people. Some people crave salt, some people crave sugar. I crave sugar. And some people can eat quite a bit at altitude, and some people can eat nothing at altitude. The beauty is we all have loads of fat stores on our bodies, even the skinny amongst us. We just need to figure out how to access those. So as it becomes harder to digest food through the mouth, hopefully we can access our fat stores to continue performing up high. And that's all through training and practice. But with that said, like a lot of people ask, yeah, but specifically, what do you bring? Like this question came up at the breakfast table today. So on my summit push on oxygen, I bring 2 half-liter water bottles. So that should immediately tell you that we are massively dehydrated on our summit push, but it's just not practical to carry more and we can't really process more. So 2 half-liter water bottles. And then I'll usually have 2 sets of gummies. Like I like Scratch gummies, Scratch Lab gummies, but some sort of like caffeinated carbohydrate sugar gummies. I'll bring 2 bars and maybe I'll eat one of those two. But if I feel like I need something to actually chew and like a real snack, that's where a bar. I use right now Macro and Aloha bars, but it's basically whatever you like and whatever doesn't freeze into a rock when you're up there. And then I'll bring 2 goos of some sort, like carbohydrate gels. And those I really don't want to use. They're messy, they're annoying, they're gross. But if I'm experiencing a bit of a bonk, that is the single fastest way to get calories, sugar, and caffeine into my system. And those two things are going to help me through that kind of like wall that I hit.
All right, can you talk a little bit about your heated glove and sock system?
Yeah, so heated gloves and socks have really transformed climbing for me. I probably would have had to retire due to frostbite damage on my feet over decades if it wasn't for heated socks. That sounds extreme, but like, Sam, like I need to wear heated socks in order to have feeling in my feet on a 50
Trail running on a
sunny
60-degree day in Tahoe.
in California. Exactly. And so these things have just transformed that struggle that I've had for so long with good lithium batteries that are reliable. I only use these things on summit day. So all the way up to summit day, I'm using all the traditional methodologies to stay warm enough. And that's everything from hydration to food intake to properly fitting clothing and gloves and things like that to having potentially things like charcoal hand warmers and stuff like that. But we still can't really charge batteries up high on any of these mountains. We can only charge at base camp. So you're saving that stuff for that one riskiest, most dangerous day, and that's summit day. But so I use a brand of socks called Lens socks that work underneath my regular sock because I still need a backup for if and when the battery does die, right? Like we can't just depend on something electrical. So still using a traditional warm sock as well in an 8,000 meter boot. But yeah, they really help. And then gloves are a newer change, but gloves are enabling me. Like I haven't worn a mitten on an 8,000 meter summit in 7 years now, 7 or 8 years because of heated gloves. And essentially being able to be in a glove means I can do everything with so much more dexterity. It's transformational as compared to having to go into a big mitten with a hand warmer. So I use Black Diamond heated gloves and I've just been like phenomenally happy.
Talk a little bit about your layering systems and kind of how that changes as you go up the mountain. Is it just addition or do you change your system as you get higher?
Another great question because it's one of my pet peeves. We don't change systems, we just build. That's the key to not carrying a bunch of extra shit. Like if you wear one system up to 23,000 feet and then you switch to a different system and leave the stuff you carried up there, I see it all the time. It's like, well, you just carried pounds of extra stuff. And in the whole ball game in climbing 8,000-meter peaks is efficiency and using the fewest calories possible for each necessary task. That's it. That's the whole thing. And so carrying less while still having what you need to be safe is key. So my layering system just keeps building. So below 7,000 meters, I'm going to wear what looks like traditional stuff that we would wear in Colorado or California, or as we go to, bigger mountains in South America. So for me, that's 1 to 2 layers of long underwear under a soft shell pant that breathes. And then on the upper body, yeah, lightweight wool top, then this grid fleece that I'm wearing here, ultra light fleecy type top, then super thin soft shell to cut the wind, and then a light puffy jacket. And that's kind of my system for climbing down low on the mountain. And the beauty is that's exactly what I wear higher on the mountain, but I just add my down suit on top. We're working on the holy grail of down suits right now with Black Diamond. So stay tuned on that. But eventually I'm going to add the down suit, but all of that stuff is underneath. So again, as I'm coming back down off the mountain and I start getting hot, eventually I get to a point where I dump the down suit and I've got my soft shell layers to stop wind and snow. And I've got my insulation layers that go under them. And I just keep right on moving. The only thing I change on a 5-day summit push is my socks. That is the single thing that I change in a 5-day push. And the way I change is actually my climbing socks stay the same for all 5 days. They're fitted to my boots. They're exactly what I need. But then I have a sleep sock at night so I can dry the climbing socks that I wore. That's the only thing in my system that, if I'm doing it right, that's the only thing that gets nasty and sweaty and that needs to dry. So the climbing socks go off and the sleeping socks go on. Everything else stays the same. And then, other climbers, most of the guides I work with use a similar system. Since I'm a cold climber, that's where I might have the 2 layers of long underwear under the soft shell, whereas another climber might have only 1 layer of long underwear under the soft shell. But almost always we use that system. The other interesting thing your listeners might be interested in, there's no Gore-Tex or hard shell in that system. And the reason for that is that it doesn't rain up here. It only snows. And so soft shells, for backcountry skiers in California know this well, like soft shells are incredibly effective against wind and snow. And yet they breathe many, many times better than a hard shell. So they can stay a part of our system under our down suit.
All right. So this leads into the next one because you're going to need it at the end of your climb. Are there showers?
Oh, the showers. Yeah, of course there are showers, but it's a great question because people never know. Here at base camp, we've worked over years to get the perfect shower system. So now we have like full on demand, you know, propane heated hot water showers that we can really enjoy here in base camp because we drive to our base camp at 17,000 feet. So we can bring big, modern, almost like home equipment here. Up at ABC, there is a shower. It's a big bucket of hot water from the kitchen with an electric pump to a shower head in a little yellow tent that hopefully, if the sun's out, heats up enough that it's not a really painful experience. But we really encourage our climbers, like, getting the water for that shower entails chopping ice from the glacier, carrying the ice from the glacier to the kitchen, melting it over hours and hours and hours to create water for a shower. So we really, encourage people to consider when they need a shower. And this might be what the question kind of insinuated. Yeah, it might be like once after all the acclimatization rotations before the 5-day summit push kind of thing. Or it might be just after the summit push if we have to stay in ABC for a while the Sherpa and guides are finishing cleaning the mountain kind of thing. We all stay in support. So yes, there are showers at 21,000 feet. It's an experience you don't want to have very often.
All right. We got our last question here. Nice one to wrap it up. Any thoughts or plans about making mountaineering carbon neutral?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, when we consider like the things necessary to enjoy the sports we do out in the mountains, which mean like snow and cold temperatures, of course, I think we are often like canary in the coal mine, or we used to be like 20 years ago, seeing glacial retreat and things like that. It was maybe more obvious to us as climbers the effects of climate change than you were necessarily seeing at home in the United States or Europe or other places like this. So I think it's important we also consider our effects on climate change through personal action. You know, of course, I'm a member of Protect Our Winters, and I really encourage us not to get into the game of shaming each other for our carbon use, but rather to use our voice and energy to change national, federal policies in whatever country you live in to encourage corporate change that could actually make a difference on a large scale. With that said, Alpenglow offsets as much as we can of what our guides and kind of like infrastructure carbon costs are or carbon effect is. And we encourage our clients to consider doing those things again. I fully recognize all the issues with offsets, but I kind of think it is the one thing we can do currently until policy either institutes a carbon tax or market capitalism and federal policy shifts major innovation in things like flying, driving, traveling. The one thing I will argue to the death is that international travel and having these huge experiences on massive mountains around the world, the potential positive to individuals and communities, I believe, is far greater than the negative impact from our carbon footprint. And I never want to encourage people to travel less. I think us mixing with different communities and cultures around the world is essential to this world and planet surviving. And so I want to encourage travel, encourage big dreams, encourage going to the mountains of your dreams like Mount Everest. And then, with that said, think about what we can do to move the needle on climate change.
Awesome. I love that. That's a great way to wrap things up. So, thank you for your time. Pretty wild that we're talking literally across the world. You're at 17,000 feet in Tibet, and I'm right at home in Lake Tahoe, but very little delay and glitchiness on this recording. So, pretty rad. And thanks for taking the time.
I think this worked better than when we're each in our little A-frames 10 minutes away from each other in Lake Tahoe. It's pretty amazing. It's one of the cool benefits of the North Side is they have installed 5G cell towers here at base camp. And again, we get line of sight to them higher on the mountain. So we actually go into a dead spot at advanced base camp and we get to kind of go old school and everyone plays cards and talks on a lot more because their phones aren't quite as connected. And I still really enjoy those moments. We have satellite internet for when people need it and things like that. But I do still really enjoy that. But I also, like, I can see with my team here how much, I'm going to use the word healthier they are because they're in touch with their loved ones. They're experiencing, like, I watched one last night watching their kids' like soccer game on the phone. So they were there for their 9-year-old soccer game, even though they were here. Maybe a little less anxiety being able to stay in touch with work. So there's a dark side for sure. But here I feel fortunate that we have it and it let us do this. So thanks for working with the time difference, Sam, and having me on.
Yeah, well, we'll be following along as you guys make your way up the mountain, and best of luck. Before you go, can you unplug and give us a little bit of a view of what you're looking at outside your tent there?
Oh, yeah, let's give it a try.
For our YouTube listeners.
Yeah, exactly. Go to the YouTube to check out the view. And thanks to all the listeners and people that did submit questions. Like, this podcast is a community. Like, that's why we do it. And this was one of the episodes where we really got to lean into that and hear what you were interested in. So I look forward to doing a lot more of this. Okay, let's go outside.
Absolutely.
I'm going to take the mic and everything. Let's see. So right now I'm in my sleeping tent, which is also like the guides hangout and working tent. So it's a little bigger than everyone else's tent. So we can have meetings over here. We're organizing first aid kits right now. This is my bed. I actually don't tell anyone I have an electric blanket. We all do. So it's not too cold. because we have unlimited power from a little hydroelectric system that gets put in the river while we're here. Walking outside, this is our big dining tent. Over here are our kitchen and store tents. And as we go around, these are all our member and guide sleeping tents. So everyone gets a cot and a second room with a desk, a bunch of room to stretch out, electricity. And looking right back there, that's the north face of Mount Everest, 12,000 feet above us is the summit on kind of a perfect day.
Looks beautiful up there and doesn't look too far away.
Feels a little ways away. It is maybe one of the most intimidating views on the planet. You just drive in to the north side of Mount Everest in your minivan, and it's just like one of the most famous alpine faces in the world, the north face of the mountain, and the summit up there. We get to look just all day, every day at kind of like the weather, how much wind there is. This morning we had a lenticular. It looks like it's cleaned out now. So it's all just waiting for us.
Awesome. Well, best of luck out there, and thanks for taking the time.
Absolutely. Thanks to all the listeners. Thank you, Sam, and looking forward to doing it again in a couple of weeks.
Thanks for listening to the Duffel Shuffle podcast. You can follow along on Instagram, where we post our favorite clips from each episode, as well as more about the world of climbing, skiing, and mountaineering. If you haven't already, please subscribe, rate us, and leave us a review on your favorite podcast platform. Catch you next time, and until then, we hope you enjoy some time outside.